The Big Boy 5, the Fantasy Ruckers 2023 Top Player Fantasy Rankings reveal continues. And on this episode, it's all about the big boys. We reveal the top 5 fantasy front rowers from the 2023 Fantasy Major League Rugby season. And we look at what it all means for the future at that position in the world of fantasy MLR. We also take a look back at the predictions of the front rowers at the start of the season. And let me tell you, it's an interesting one to look back on. And of course, with the 2023 Collegiate Draft coming up this Thursday, there's a whole bunch of news, notes, and roster moves to break down. The Fantasy Rucker Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 76 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. I am Ryan Yee, and with me, as always, Matt Yee, Devin, Vandy, Vanderpool. And guys, it might be the offseason, but a jam-packed week. Collegiate Draft coming up this Thursday, and we got some news, some movement here. A little bit of clarity with the Miami Sharks, some trades going on. It's been a busy week in the world of MLR.
You know what the best thing about this draft coming up is that I have no idea who the heck these guys are.
That makes two of us, buddy. That makes two of us.
I mean, like, I haven't even seen, much kind of, mock drafts. I don't even think the man himself, Fitzy,
our mock
knows who half
hot
of
for
these
rugby?
guys are.
Well,
look, there was one last year.
That's
there was
true.
for sure.
It is true.
Ryan Ray, I think Rugby Morning had one. I don't know if I'm just missing out, but it seems like everybody's kind of realizing, what are we even mock drafting for?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting this year, and there's a whole lot to obviously break down when it comes to the Collegiate Draft that is coming up this Thursday. Obviously, we've talked about it last episode. There's a different feeling. There's a weird feeling, and Matt, you and we were all talking before we hopped on the show here about obviously last season. We had Rugby Morning on. We were doing previews. We knew a bunch of the players coming in. Matt, you were close with some of them. You knew some of the guys coming through, but this year it's just like you said, it's a weird one, and it's going to be very telling how this year, how the draft, or depending on how the draft goes, it'll be telling kind of the value moving forward in terms of the Collegiate Draft and Major League Rugby.
And I mean, I think there's one real question that we got to have. I mean, what type of barbecue are they selling at this place, right? That's it.
That's a weird one.
That is true.
Well, it's in Chicago?
It is in Chicago.
Okay, so what kind of dogs are they selling? What kind of deep dishes are they
Deep dish
selling?
pizza, I was just going to say.
Boy.
What type of deep dish pizza place? What type of dogs place are they at?
You mean what type of glizzies they selling? Ooh, Ryan, go back.
Oh,
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, hey, we got
draft ain't full of any dogs.
got a jam-packed episode in this one. In addition to obviously talking about the latest news and notes that we've mentioned, lots of trades going on. The Miami Sharks announcing some of those signings that they did from their expansion draft, and of course the Collegiate Draft coming up this Thursday. We also got we're continuing our rankings here. Last week we broke down our top 10 2023 top fantasy MLR players, and now we're going position by position, and today we are starting off with the big boys. We're talking about the front rowers. Could be clutch coming into fantasy. They made a difference, some players, and also was a little bit tough to combine points in other avenues and other teams, but we're going to break it all down and kind of talk a little bit about the impact that these big boys have in the world of fantasy MLR, and we'll see whether or not there's some nuggets there for you to take on as we move forward with this fantasy rugby thing, and maybe some tips that you can take with you into the 2024 draft. So it might be the offseason, but guys, got a jam-packed episode in this one. But hey, before we get into any of that, just like we say every single episode, if you aren't already, make sure you're following us at the Fantasy Ruckers. The handles are up there above if you're watching the YouTube video, down below in the description if you're listening on the podcast, X, Instagram, YouTube, at the Fantasy Ruckers. You can search us. If that's all not enough for you, we also got a Discord channel that you can find in the description. The invite link is there below as well. You'll be able to communicate with all all of our Fantasy Ruckers League members, a bunch of other community members who have been following along on this fantasy rugby journey, which have been great. And then again, we've been mentioning it all season long, and it was something that we implemented last year. We got a website too, thefantasyruckers.com. Even if you're not a fantasy rugby junkie, it's just a whole bunch of information on their stats, player breakdowns. There's a whole bunch of stuff there, and it's something that we're going to continue working on, continue improving. The great mastermind behind it, Alistair Kirschpool, the gentleman oddball, the oddball gentleman himself. He's been a big part of that, and obviously we're in big gratitude and big thanks to him. But he's done an excellent job, and again, we're going to continue moving forward and revamping that and making that even better moving forward. And again, all those social media channels are going to be where you want to be. We talked about it on the show before. We want to expand this to the masses. We want to get fantasy rugby, fantasy MLR out there to everyone enjoying it. We're taking baby steps here. The first season didn't even have a website. Now we got a website. Next step is to bring it to as many people as we can, and you'll be able to hear all about that on our social media channels at the Fantasy Ruckers. And hey, while you're at it, give these guys that are with me here a follow as well, at the Rucking Goat for Devin Vanderpool, at Yee95 for Matt Yee, and myself at Ryan J. Yee. All right, well, hey, let's get into it, guys. Again, it might be the offseason, but got a whole lot to get to in this one. And let's start off with some of this news and notes that we got to get out of the way before we start talking a little bit of draft stuff. But let's talk about this expansion draft that we did talk about last episode. We mentioned how, there were a whole bunch of players that were selected in this expansion draft, but it looks like only 4 of them have agreed to that signing. Obviously, that deadline passing by on that Sunday there, and in order to get an agreement with the Miami Sharks. And it looks like it's Thomas Caceres, which Matt, you alluded to last episode, that was going to happen from the New England Free Jacks. Eric Naposki, Alex Tucci of the Dallas Jackals going to the Miami Sharks, and of course Shane O'Leary as well, signing with the Sharks. Hey, Miami making some of their rosters finalized here, getting a little bit of clarity with MLR's newest team.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think this is just what we know. I don't know. Maybe there's other signings as well. I don't really think deadlines even matter to the MLR. I think it's just a facade that they just put up as a joke and just to rub it in our face that they don't listen to them. But, I'm surprised that, and I was surprised in the expansion draft, but I'm surprised that Dallas Jackals kind of just let Eric Naposki go. I know he had that knee injury last year, but man, was he a guy that was electric to watch on the wing, and I'm sure he'll do the same for Miami. And I think, with some of the Toronto Arrows signings and trades, getting Robbie Povey, I think last year or last week I was kind of alluding that, hey, Shane O'Leary is probably a good fit to sign with the Miami Sharks, just because there really doesn't seem to be a spot for him on his home team anyways.
And again, when you look at this whole breakdown of the list, obviously in the expansion draft, Miami drafting 25 guys from across the league. It was, I believe, 5 players from each team that was made available to the Miami Sharks. And yeah, 4 guys being, at least that we know of, like you said, Matt, moving over there to the Miami Sharks. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more that come out, because the
you don't care about deadlines.
Has always been an iffy one here with Major League Rugby.
There was a signing deadline. There was a trade deadline. None of them were cared about.
None of it matters.
But nonetheless,
none of it even matters.
Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, and let's say that these are the 4 signings that do come from this draft. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of moves forward here with the Miami Sharks. Obviously, they've had some international signings that have come in that we've talked about on previous episodes as well. They have the first overall pick in this upcoming Thursday's draft. It's gonna be an interesting one. If I had to make a prediction, at least right now, it's gonna be a tough sledding ahead for the Miami Sharks. But hey, it's always gonna be tough for an expansion team coming in and not having the luxury of 2 teams that we will not name on this show anymore, folding and being available for the then Chicago Hounds that were able to kind of take advantage of that. Not the same situation here for the Miami Sharks.
Hey, you know what?
Maybe it'll turn out better for them.
Yeah,
can't turn out much worse.
Thanks for bringing it up, but I was just looking at, I'm heading out to old Austin to see Mr. Gilchrist. Have a meeting with him. Figure out what go to the old stomping grounds of the Gilgronis. And I see they're still up on the Austin website. What sports to watch, and the Gilgronis are right there. If you want to watch a sellout team, go out and watch those bad boys that went bankrupt. Chapter 9, right in the.
It's in case you still want to buy their
heart
merch.
Of Austin. Yeah, just in case you want to help fund Mr. Gilchrist's beer company and fund Mr. Gilchrist's private island that he's hiding away.
Hey, we said we weren't going to name that name on this show.
All right, we had to.
Voldemort.
I will say this, back to the Miami Sharks. I think they're going to have some issues. And I think the expansion draft would have been a big way for them to try and get a bunch of proven North American talent, because they're going to need a certain number of homegrown players. I don't know where they're going to get this from. I mean, you look at that lineup, from the guys that they signed, I think all 4 of them are going to be their like kind of North American players. I don't know where they're going to get the rest. Are they going to get that through the draft? Are they going to get that through signings? I'm not sure, but it'll be interesting to see how they fill out the team around all the South American players that they're going to sign and that they've already signed.
Yeah,
it's still wild to me that they don't have to sign there.
It is crazy. It's a very weird dynamic there, Vandy. I know, like we mentioned last episode, like the other sports, like it doesn't work like that.
Vandy, the MLR, if we figured out anything, the MLR just kind of makes its own rules, and I'm pretty sure they make it up as they go.
But hey, we're just adapting and following as we can. But again, to kind of circle it back to a fantasy conversation, when you look at all these guys, at least that we know of, that are going to be playing for the Miami Sharks next season, at least out of this name of 4, Thomas Caceres, Eric Naposki, Alex Tucci, Shane O'Leary. Last season, really not that much fantasy impact. Shane O'Leary getting a total of 66.1 fantasy points last season with the Toronto Arrows there. Yeah, his high was 10.6 at the fullback position. Again, it was with a struggling Toronto Arrows team. So we'll see if he maybe has a little bit more opportunity with the Miami Sharks. Maybe Shane O'Leary is a guy that does become a little bit more fantasy relevant. I will say, though, and you guys can either agree or disagree, but I think out of these names, it will be Eric Naposki. That will be the guy that is probably going to end up being the most fantasy relevant, obviously dealing with injury last season. It didn't play after starting in all 5 games for the Dallas Jackals. He had a big week in week 2, a 17.7 fantasy point performance, 2 tries, 45 meters gained. So if he's able to get consistent opportunity with Miami Sharks, this is a guy that can be fantasy relevant. And if you look at, he was the first overall pick in that 2021 draft, has a lot of pedigree there, and we'll see whether or not he can make most of that opportunity with the Miami Sharks. So should be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think Naposki's due for a pretty good comeback season, but we won't know until we see more of this Miami Sharks signing, more of the roster, to understand what the opportunity actually looks like for these guys.
Yeah, and that's going to be something that's going to unfold as the season goes on, and it's going to be interesting to see how this Miami Sharks roster starts to kind of look, and that's where we're going to find that fantasy relevancy, is seeing what opportunity is actually there for some of these players. All right, and there's still no shortage of other moves going around the league as well. A whole bunch of trades, a couple of trades that we got to talk about, and pretty big ones too. And I got to give props to whatever the Toronto Arrows front office is doing right now, because they are trying to turn things around. Obviously, the acquisition of Ruida Biddle in the previous weeks, and now they're bringing a big time name again over to their squad. Tarangatira Waitokia is a Toronto Arrow now, coming from Rugby Atlanta for 2024 cap considerations. I don't know, man. This Arrows team is going to look completely different, I think, heading into this 2024 season. And maybe it's a stretch to say, and it's hard to put a lot of confidence in this Arrows team after the performance that they had in 2023. But with the moves that they made early in this offseason, getting Robbie Povey as well, like you mentioned, Matthew, this is going to be a team that is going to be completely different, I think, in 2024. And you can't rule them out, and you can't expect that they'll necessarily be as bad as they were in 2020, as bad as they were in 2023.
Back-to-back trades with the team that's
spoken like a true
no
Toronto
longer
fan.
Exists. Back-to-back trades with a team that no longer exists.
That's true.
Is it telling that Toronto just happened to be in Atlanta during that COVID pandemic season and be very close to the Rugby Atlanta squad?
This is all conspiracy. This is all conspiracy.
What's going on?
That was a
cap
while
considerations,
ago, Matt.
like, yeah, but you keep relationships alive. You keep that tight relationship, and maybe just before the ownership, maybe just before they could throw in the towel, they said, "Hey, Toronto will throw you some bones." And what did they do? They threw him Ruida Biddle. They threw him Tarangatira Waitokia, the 10th best back 3 in the league for fantasy wise.
Yeah.
We'll just throw you some bones for salary cap considerations. Nice. Oh, you had a tough year last year? Here, have our 2 top back 3 players. Just take them.
We obviously don't need them anymore.
Yeah. So kind of interesting. I think, like you said, Rye, great move for Toronto. It'll be interesting to see what they look like. And surprising to see them pick up more international talent, just because, they're a team that's so used to only playing homegrown Canadian-born players. But I think it's good. I think it's good, and what it does is make them a bit more competitive in this league.
Yeah, no, it's outstanding. Again, Terrangatira Waitokia, like you
Wow.
mentioned, Matt.
Both.
Top 10 back three player from a fantasy perspective this season. Had a stretch of games between rounds 8 and rounds 14 where he had six straight double-digit fantasy performances. His best one in round 14, 21.1 fantasy points on that week. 2 tries, 80 meters gained, 7 tackles. The Toronto Arrows are getting a solid player, and it'll be interesting to see. Does this hurt Rangatira Waitokia's fantasy value? Not too sure yet. We're going to obviously see a different Toronto Arrows roster here, and it's going to be interesting to try to navigate that. As Vandy nods his head, no question. Clearly, we know where he stands with this Toronto Arrows team. Not a whole lot of confidence, I know, after that 2023 year. But hey, again, Robbie Povey, Ruida Biddle, Rangatira Waitokia, those are 3 big-time players. Those aren't little names here. Those are big names that are going to a Toronto Arrows squad that are really trying to turn things around. And it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, because again, this Arrow squad is going to look completely different than what it looked like in 2023, at least from a roster standpoint. Coach standpoint as well. And then let's now shifting over there to another trade that happened. A little bit more value going across here, but Devin Short becoming a Seattle Seawolf. Nola Gold moving him for the 2023 first round pick, 11th overall pick, plus 2024 cap considerations. Seattle Seawolves getting solid player in Devin Short from the Nola Gold.
Yeah, I think this is just Seattle saying, I do not care about these picks this year. You can have all of them, Nola Gold. Take them all, because I do not care about these guys. Why would I care about this guy when I can get Devin Short, an absolute stud who's proven himself in the MLR, just adding to that Seattle back row of Ronan Foley, Charles Elton, the Royd Boy, Devin Short, just, and just, it just adds. And honestly, the one thing that I think about is like, all right, so what's happening with their back row?
Yeah.
What is causing them to, why Devin Short? Why did they give up this pick for Devin Short? They already had a stacked back row. They just picked up Ronan Foley last year. Maybe. But yeah, it kind of, in some of these trades, it kind of leads you to think, all right, what's going on? Who's not signing back with them? Who are they moving next? That's what this whole MLR offseason is all about. And just more reasons this trade just backs up the point that nobody cares about these picks except Nola Gold. Finished 7th last.
Again. Which we'll get into in just a moment here on how many picks Nola is really racking up here. But yeah, should be interesting in terms of fantasy impact. Again, Devin Short didn't really appear last season.
He was
injured. Appeared in round 4, started 3 matches, round 5, around 11, and round 12, at least in the fantasy season. Not really fantasy relevant here, but again, yeah, that's something to look out for fantasy managers. Again, taking a look at that Seattle Seawolves back row and just seeing how busy it is in that section, and really trying to pinpoint who you're going to choose there. Obviously, you're going to side with guys from a fantasy perspective with Reichert Hadding, obviously Ronan Foley really picking things up there towards the tail end of the season last year. You had Devin Short to the mix. Charles Elton obviously was up there, so it's going to hurt someone's fantasy value. It's now just pinpointing who among that mix it's going to really hurt. If I had to put in, obviously I'm still confident with a lot of that Seattle Seawolves back row, because obviously Devin Short still has at least a comeback to come from with that injury here, and we'll see whether or not he can solidify himself within that Seattle Seawolves starting lineup, which is obviously the big takeaway when it comes to fantasy perspective stuff. All right, and as we get into more of the trade stuff and obviously the draft picks that are being moved here ahead of this collegiate draft, I'm still having a hard time here, guys. I'm trying to figure out trade value in this league, because you look at that Terrangatira Waitokia trade, 2024 cap considerations. Then you look at what's moved for Devin Short, first round pick and cap considerations. You could argue that Terrangatira Waitokia has more of a pedigree, at least from the 2023 season, of the impact that he has made. And you think a little bit more would be moved to get a player like that, but nonetheless, just an exchange of money, or at least money space, moving for a player like that. I don't know. It's hard so far, and this has been something that's historical as we've been following this league for years and years and years. Just having a hard time figuring out some of the trades that occur in MLR.
I've asked people in the MLR, I've asked players, and
Nope.
I have no idea.
You haven't asked anybody.
I'm
You
thinking,
just rack these in your own brain.
I'm thinking cap considerations is a straight wire of money. It's gotta be. It's gotta be. My tinfoil hat here of conspiracy theories is telling me that it's a straight ass or straight wire of money. That's all it is.
Venmo.
It's a little bit of like,
Venmo.
I'll give you
Wow.
the first round pick, which I don't hold very high, and then you Venmo me.
So here's the issue, though. Here's the
$100,000.
issue, though. It's got, Toronto Arrows. There's no Venmo in Canada. How are they going to get the Venmo app?
Very
Well,
Atlanta's
that's why
got the
we're dealing
Venmo
with
app.
Nola
There's no
and
Venmo
Utah.
app in Canada.
Hey,
Well, hey,
Exactly.
how did Atlanta receive the cap considerations? What, they get
well, they
$5,000?
sold the team.
Well,
Probably came down to
okay.
Toronto, had a
Got
nice
it.
night in a hotel, did all
Now-
that.
Yeah. They probably did a briefcase. That's the wire transfer they did.
I will. Yeah, you got a
Got
shady
off the
guy.
GO train?
Meeting
Yeah.
at the parking lot. You exchange, drop it at a park bench. Guy
The
comes, picks it
goggles,
up.
trench coat on.
You lay Tarangatira Waitokia on the bench. You take the briefcase from under there. But no, it's interesting. And I don't know. Again, there's a lot of different moving parts, and we've mentioned this on the show before. There's a lot of different moving parts that are moved in these trades when it comes to MLR compared to other leagues. You got cap considerations. You got international slots.
We don't know of.
You got and you got a bunch of different options when it comes to pieces that can be moved, and maybe certain, and we don't know the logistics behind, we don't know the cap that these teams have. We don't know necessarily the details of a lot of this stuff. So hey, maybe there is a very high value of the 2024 cap or cap considerations as a whole, obviously that being moved in both the Devin Short trade and in the Tarangatira Waitokia trade, which leads us though, Vandy, which you are alluding to here as we get into more of this draft conversation, is Nola racking up these picks. Matt says that a lot of these teams are figuring out, hey, let's not value really that highly this 2024 draft and the picks that are in there. But apparently Nola is going the other way, and they're taking the opportunity of being like, hey, if everyone's going to ship off their picks, why don't we collect them all? And they acquire another first round pick on top of the one that they received for Devin Short. They get a 7th overall pick from the Utah Warriors for a 2024 third round pick, and of course, cap consideration. So is there anything here that Nola knows that we don't know in making it the reason why they're acquiring all these picks?
Tinfoil hat, money.
I think they just honestly, people are willing to give them up, and they're just taking them.
Yeah, that's true.
So this
That's
is
it.
like the Halloween for the MLR. Homie's just knocking on the door and it's trick or treat, and you're like, here's a first round pick. Here's another
Well,
one. Here's
it's
another
funny
one.
because
And you know what? All I want is you consider some salary.
Yeah.
It-
I mean, the
Okay.
other thing is they're
Okay.
probably trying to get Sebastian Villani's brother on the same team. They want the Villani brothers, so they're trying to make sure that they
They're
get
hedging
as
their
many
bets.
picks as they can so that they can make it happen.
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, MLR laundering money. The same way artwork goes for too
All
much.
right, Vandy. All right, Vandy.
Say it
Now we're just throwing the whole league under the bus. But I will say that I think it was either Brian Ray, Jam Delay, MLR Stats Jam Delay, one of his personas, kind of said like maybe they're trying to put all these picks together to get the first overall pick from Miami.
That'd be interesting.
do what?
Miami could use would rather have more players
That's true.
that are from homegrown talent versus one guy who's probably not going to make their team and probably not going to change their franchise.
True.
But maybe that's different to Nola.
Or
So
they
maybe
can just
that's it.
ask Miami for some salary cap considerations and
That too.
pick anyways.
That too.
Well, so that's the thing, right? And again, I think we've seen this, maybe to not this extent, but we've seen this in other sports where you see all the teams shifting in one direction. There have been years in the past where it seems like everyone wants to get rid of their, you look at the NFL, there are years where they're just, no one wants their draft picks. You know what I mean? They're shipping off. And there's the one or two teams there. They're like, hey, you know what? If everyone's willing to give them away, why don't we go against the grain here and take advantage of that? Why not? Why not? If everyone's doing it, I mean, someone's got to pick those picks. And if people are going to give them away for chump change, like a third round pick and cap considerations, why not try to acquire some picks here?
Careful. Tread lightly, Ryan.
I know it's your boys, the Utah Warriors, but nonetheless, though, hey, maybe the Nola Gold. I'm not saying that they're onto anything, but hey, maybe it works out for them in the end, and they're able to acquire some talent that we don't know about. Obviously, there has been a discussion about that, which we're going to get into here in just a moment's time. But hey, maybe Nola Gold is trying to do something different here that may work out for them in the long run. It's for us. I think the opinion of this show is that we don't think it will. but based on what we've seen in this talent pool that's coming in, which we'll discuss about here, but yeah, it should be interesting.
Just wait till we consider all of our cap.
Yeah, and that third round pick really going to go a long way for you in
Next year. Hey, maybe the draft's better.
Yeah. Hey, who knows? That's true. It's a good point. But hey, let's talk about it. Obviously, with talking about some of these picks being moved, before we get into our big time front rower rankings, yeah, draft happening this Thursday. We discussed it in detail last week, in our last episode about how there's this whole speculation about the draft pool in this year not being that great. We quoted a tweet that was sent out by Brian Ray. I believe it's one Cal player that is has declared for the draft. No Navy players. 2 teams that are in the top of the league. No UBC guys in this pool, where we saw a whole bunch of them last season. And it has put some question into the talent of players that is coming through here in this 2023 collegiate draft. Teams are having their own strategies about it. Teams are shipping away their picks. We saw what the Toronto Arrows did. We're seeing what the Seattle Seawolves are doing to acquire Devin Short. NOLA doing the opposite here. But just with the 2023 draft coming up here, guys, this week on Thursday, what are our thoughts heading into this? What are we thinking here? Is kind of the telltale sign here. Once the draft is all done, what are we going to know about the value of this collegiate draft and what it really means?
The same thing that we've been saying the past 2 weeks, and none of them are going to make any starting lineups of any
Yeah, you
teams.
need to see them develop before, I guess, we can make a actual stat.
I don't even need to see them develop.
Well, I guess the question is not necessarily seeing the players develop, but it's just interesting the telltale signs that we've seen in the develop leading up to this. And, we'll pull up a James Dealey stat here that he's saying. You're seeing some big time names that have been in the past. In the 2020 draft, Connor Mooneyham selected with that first overall pick. Eric Naposki selected in that 2021 first overall pick. And then obviously last year, and I think last year makes it so much more blatant and so much more obvious here in terms of the differences between the 2022 draft and the difference between the 2023 draft. Sam Galla, right? Earns Rookie of the Year, first overall pick, started basically every single match in that 2023 season, or 2023 season for the Dallas Jackals. So many other names making big time appearances for their squads here. We mentioned guys like Cali Martinez, Owen Rudden, and guys that we've had on this show who have made appearances here. We just don't get that same feeling heading into this 2023 draft, which is what we've alluded to here. There hasn't been as much hype around it. We haven't seen as many mock drafts. The build up to it hasn't been as big in terms of the players. And again, big time rugby pundits like Brian Ray have come out and are outspoken about their questions and concerns that they have in the terms of the value of this draft, at least for the 2023 year.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty warranted. There's always been kind of a name that we could point to. Sam Galla was somebody there was a lot of noise about.
Right.
I mean, even guys like down the list of last year's draft, we were making noise about and heard noise about. And yeah, it's just, we've said it the past couple weeks. If you're comparing draft classes, this is definitely a weak one. And the teams obviously know that. We can see it by their actions. And I think we can kind of see by what some of the stats that are coming out.
Yeah, no, it should be interesting. And just to kind of highlight the disparity in terms of this year's draft compared to last year's or year's draft before. Again, another tweet by James Dealey at JamDelay on Twitter, at MLR Stats on Instagram, just reviewing some of the MLR draft prospects. In 2021, 168 was the total size of the prospect pool. 2022, growing 174, again, including a lot of big time names. In 2023, 104. So almost cutting it by a third in terms of the number of prospects that are in this pool entering this year's draft. And again, I think we're going to learn a lot from this 2023 and the results that come out of Thursday's draft. It'll be interesting to see kind of what happens and the talent that they're able to acquire here, especially in Nola's case, who has so many draft picks. And again, like Vandy, you alluded to, we'll learn more about the value of this draft as it progresses forward. And we see these guys make appearances for these squads if they do end up making appearances. And again, I think the big question when it comes to this collegiate draft is, what is the value of this draft? Can you build a team and build a squad, not all in part due to this draft, but at least have some sort of impact? By the way that teams have been operating heading into this year's draft, you'd argue that teams don't really think that it can. But again, you look at the 2022 draft, you get guys like Sam Gala, you get other big names in there. You'd argue differently here. So again, it's a developing thing. We talked a lot about it on last week's show. So if you want to go into more in depth about our opinions here about that question in terms of the value of the collegiate draft in the space of rugby, in the space of Major League Rugby particularly, you can check out that episode 75 last week. But again, should be very interesting on Thursday how it all plays out. I think we're going to learn a lot. And again, that draft airs on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. on Fox Sports 2 and on the Rugby Network. So again, we'll be tuning in and to see kind of what it has. And again, to turn it all around back into a fantasy rugby conversation, at least I think our consensus predictions here is that really we're not going to have a Sam Gala in this year's draft. It doesn't seem like. But again, hey, we've been far off on our predictions before, and hey, maybe there's someone that surprises us here in this year's draft, and we'll see whether or not we're proven wrong. But again, just early feelings about it is a little bit questionable here. But all right, guys. Well, you ready to talk about some big boys here? You already talked about some.
Yeah, these guys, some guys who actually made an impact and will make an impact in the MLR.
And we talk about
draft.
Savage.
We talk about predictions. We're going to get into it. Obviously, Matt and myself had our top 5 positions for each position. And yeah, there was definitely some things that happened this year that we didn't expect.
How the heck was I supposed to predict
My
Dean
top
Muir was
5
going
got
to leave
lost
for
in the
half the
wash,
season
but-
with a family issue?
Yeah.
I had 3 out of 5. It just got lost in the wash, man. My dog
Whatever.
ate it.
Yeah, sure. But all right,
Not
the way
a
this is
dog.
going to work, we're going to bring up the graphic
I'm
here.
the
We're going to
dog.
reveal the top 5 front rowers on for the 2023 season. Again, you can check all this out on our website, thefantasyruckers.com. Look into more detail with our top 5 players. You can look at every single front rower and the way that they were made able to make a fantasy impact in the 2023 season. See their stats, see how it all played out. Again, thefantasyruckers.com. But we're going to throw up our top 5 here and reveal to you who were the best of the front rowers heading into it. But before we reveal it to the people, the top 5 here, overall opinion, guys, now that you've gone through a season with the expanded stats, your thoughts about the value of the front row player. And I think it's going to be a little bit more evident when we show this top 5, because I think there's some notes here and there's some interesting details that it really exemplifies here when we look at these top 5 players. But as you two both went through the grind of the 2023 year, what was your opinion on the front row player? Was it a position that you relied on? Was it a position you thought could be a game changer? What was your kind of perspective when it came to who you were going to start at that position and how you felt when you were creating your lineups about the front row position? And how that changed throughout the year too.
I'll be honest, I didn't put a ton of stock into front row because it seemed.
Yeah, we know.
Come on. It just seemed like we're not even go off that now. No, I mean, I had one of the top 5 guys. I mean, I had the 3rd best front row in the league, so I didn't really have to worry about it. It was like a set and forget type thing. But I just noticed that the front row, it was kind of a position where a guy would pop off and then maybe not show up again for another 2 or 3 weeks. You know, it wasn't something you could really use fantasy terms set and forget outside of a couple guys. But, you know, it wasn't a position I was necessarily targeting guys spending a lot of waiver money on.
Yeah. It was definitely a nice to have.
Yeah.
It was definitely like hey, if you had a guy that you could rely on and you could just always put in that front row position, it was definitely a nice to have for sure. It didn't, unless they went off, it didn't necessarily win you weeks. It wasn't necessarily the game breaker where you were making those big splash pickups like Vandy said, but it was a nice to have if you had one of these guys that were consistently putting in, 5 points every week.
It was more I just wanted numbers. Like, it didn't seem like a lot of front rows played full games, didn't play 80 minutes. I mean, it's a tough position. I don't think very many front rows at all played. Like, I'm just thinking Peter Malcolm.
Some of them.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think he played a single 80-minute game. I think it was just kind of a position you just kind of, if they get you 7 points, you're pumped about it. But they could also get you 3, and it's just something you had to accept.
All right, well, let's reveal it to the people here, because I think when we show this top 5, I think it goes to what Matthew's saying in terms of it was a nice to have, and there are a couple guys that are some really key point guys, and it drops off real quick when it comes to front row position. So the advantage that you may have if you have one of these guys is pretty crazy. So let's bring it up here. Top fantasy front rowers for the 2023 season. On your screen now, number 1, Sama Malolo of the San Diego Legion. Just an absolute incredible season. We talked about him plenty on this podcast, on this show, about just how different he is in terms of a player at that front row position, and we'll get into it in just a short time here. But number 2, Dylan Fawcett, another one of those guys that just had a spectacular season, a guy that has been a staple name, the Butcher, for the Ironworkers, just absolutely fantastic. And then number 3, Peter Malcolm, Vandy, you mentioned it, a guy that was pretty stable all season long. Number 4, Nick Suchon of Old Glory DC, and number 5, Mil Sanarivi of the New England Free Jacks. There you can see the point totals on your screen. If you're listening on the podcast, you'll notice that there's a pretty quick drop off, and we'll go through it here. But let's first talk about Sama Malolo here at the top. This guy was by far, hands down, I thought, maybe the points don't show it in terms of the discrepancy between Malolo and Fawcett, but 122.7 fantasy points on the season, averaged around 51 minutes per match, scored 3 tries, 751 meters gained, and 122 tackles. And the big one here is that 751 meters gained, because out of all the top 5 players here that we have on this list, he was the one that scored the least amount of tries. And we talked about how big try scoring is, especially for that front row position to rack up points. And the fact that he was able to finish at that number 1 spot at the front row position because of the meters gained and the ability he has to break the line and go for and as James Dealey has said before, is a meter eater. You don't see that often from the front row position, and Sama Malolo was able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that I think we were kind of early on in the season figured out that he was going to be a big part of that San Diego offense. And it wasn't from the usual kind of maul tries or pick and go tries that you expected from front rows. It was the, hey, I'm going to break the line and I'm going to run like I'm a back type of gains and type of line break. So just shows why he was the guy that we were kind of constantly looking at and constantly looking for throughout the season.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, he had a match in round 8 where he racked up 123 meters gained, like 14.3 fantasy points. That's incredible from the front row position to get triple digit meters gained. Just incredible. And again, I can't emphasize enough that just scoring 3 tries, because I think we've understood that obviously the front row position, a lot of it has to, and you'll notice that as we go through these names, is so linked with the set piece that for whatever respective team that they play for, because they're often the benefactor of that try score when it comes to those set piece tries, that obviously has value in our league. And that the name that will come up probably most often is the guy that we're going to talk about next here. But Sama Malolo didn't need that. He did take advantage a handful of times here, but again, he was just very, very reliable, tended to get you those double digit points. And when you can get that from the front row position, like Vandy alluded to, it's just something that is very, very nice to have. So then again, we'll name the number 2 guy that we mentioned, Dylan Fawcett, New York Ironworkers, coming in next, just behind the Sama Malolo with 119.9 fantasy points. But again, 2 different players, and they're 2 completely different ways in which you're getting points. Dylan Fawcett, 6 tries, double the amount that Sama Malolo was able to get, but he had about 250 meters less than what Sama Malolo was able to get at 478 meters gained. But this guy was a tackle machine, 142 tackles. But the big thing with Dylan Fawcett, and it's something that you don't often see with these front rowers, is the amount of games that he played a full 80-minute match. A lot of the time you're seeing with these front rowers, they're getting subbed out at that 45-minute mark. They're getting subbed out at that 50-minute mark. Not Dylan Fawcett, averaging 70 minutes per match. And if you know our Fantasy Ruckers League, you can hit that 70-minute mark. You get that 0.5 point bonus. And he started the 15 games, all of them that he played in. Again, with these top 2 guys, there's just things here with them that make them different, whether it's Sama Malolo's meters gained or whether it's Dylan Fawcett's availability on the field and his involvement with the New York Ironworkers set piece, in which is why he scored the 6 tries. This is why that these 2 guys are so far from the rest in terms of having that stable front rower and being such a big advantage to have one of these guys on your roster, on your fantasy squad, to contribute from a point standpoint at a position that really doesn't give you that many points that often.
Yeah. I mean, he's also versatile as well. So, I mean, sometimes one game he started in the back row.
Yep.
And just, if you're able to start in the back row, you're kind of expected to play 80 minutes and be able to play 80 minutes. But yeah, and just with that 15 out of 15 games, that's like 15 out of 15 games that he played in.
Yes. He started 15 games out of the 15 games he played in.
Cool.
It's actually
Just
wild.
clarify.
That's it. That's it.
I was
Yeah.
just clarifying.
Cool.
That's
Nice.
the
Fun to
question.
clarify.
Yeah.
No,
So
But I
wanted
just
to
love
clarify.
seeing that, the discrepancy in the ways they achieve those points.
sure.
Like we said, the tries, this guy, was a meter eater. The other guy, tackle machine, and he got the tries. It's just, I'm going to pat us on the back again with the way that we've set up these
Oh,
stats to
come
have
on.
these two. No. To have the guy who averages the most amount of minutes and the guy who averages or who got the best meters gained, and they're both at the top of their respective position. I mean, if anything, that should reiterate how kind of honed in we are on our first year of just bringing in these points. It's not like we were out to lunch by any means.
No, and that's a great point, Vandy. I mean, if you had taken how we approached the season in 2022 and the scoring format that we had there's no way that Sam Malolo would be on that list, right? It's just not something that would have happened here. But again, these two guys getting their points in different ways, and I think that's again highlights just how you can be a top player in the world of fantasy with this new system we have in different ways, which is really exciting
exactly.
stuff. But let's move on here. Let's go into the third player. But again, I want to reiterate and emphasize that there is a tier drop. I think that Dylan Fawcett and Sam Malolo are that tier 1 front rowers, and it becomes evident when you look at these rankings. When you go into these next two guys, I think there's a significant drop off to this, but nonetheless, still a top guy in the league. Peter Malcolm, the Seattle Seawolves, 110.3 fantasy points on the season, averaging 49 minutes per match. Got into the try zone a handful of times, 4 tries, 372 meters gained, 127 tackles, a respectable stat line there. Again, just doesn't have that oomph that Dylan Fawcett and Sam Malolo have, which is why there's such a drop off in that list. There's just not that X factor that they have compared to
that
Sam
and Seattle has such a good
Dylan
front
Fawcett
pack,
had.
man. They move all these guys. They
I was
really
gonna say,
whether you're having a good game or not, you just get subbed out. Their front pack is so good.
And this is our conversation at the start of the year. I mean, Peter Malcolm and James Malcolm. James Malcolm, and we'll see when we get to our rankings, is a guy who had a stellar season last year. Like, you bring two of those guys on the same squad, it's impossible to have two guys that are going to be as high scoring as Dylan Fawcett and Sam Malolo. I mean, Dylan Fawcett's backup is essentially Caleb Geiger, but Caleb Geiger started a lot of the year at prop as well. So, and Malolo, I mean, the backup was, I think, Shiloh Klein. And, you look at the drop off there, and that's quite a bit. With Seattle, Peter Malcolm, James Malcolm, these two guys are both deserve to be starters in this league. So it's kind of more difficult for him to put up the type of numbers.
But that's why you draft guys like Dylan Fawcett earlier.
Right. Exactly.
Those average, like, he gets you an average of 70 minutes.
Yeah. Pretty incredible stuff. All right. And then shifting over to the number 4 spot, Nick Suchon, 101.7 fantasy points on the season for Old Glory DC. This was kind of your prototypical way you saw a front rower was going to get you points here. He was kind of the best of the normal front rowers, essentially. He was able to take advantage of an Old Glory DC set piece that was very, very formidable at times. 7 tries on the season exemplifies that. And he was on the field for quite a bit, 59.8 average minutes per match, 262 meters gained, 140 tackles. Again, I would put him in that tier with Peter Malcolm, but again, just not... He's the prototypical front rower, the way that you're going to get points there, just not a Dylan Fawcett, not a Sam Malolo. But just, he got the job done. He was able to capitalize on those tries and that set piece connection in this world of fantasy that has existed now, when it's a front rower taking advantage of those opportunities and getting into the maul, into those lineup mauls, being the guy that has the ball when you cross that try line. Nick Suchon was the guy that was able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, anything over 50 minutes a game is higher than average, and you're liking what you see. And I think that type of added 10 minutes of game time that he averaged each match kind of helped him with those tackle numbers and helped him have more opportunity to score tries. I mean, I don't know how many times I saw him score a try in those 20 minutes of the second half. Having him on my squad was kind of nice to see him kind of extend those minutes. And he was definitely, like you said, right, a try scoring machine and a tackling machine.
All right. And then I think from there, this is where a bigger drop off happens, right? You got that tier 1 with Sam Malolo, Dylan Fawcett. You have that tier 2 of Peter Malcolm and Nick Suchon. And then it really drops off there. You have Mil Santorivi. And I want to preface this by saying that I think Santorivi, there was a bigger timeshare here. Obviously, we saw Andrew Quattrin, who we had on the show about a month ago, really share that role there at that hooker position, really splitting the fantasy point value there.
Yep.
Mil Santariri, 88.7 fantasy points on the season, just a complete drop off from even Nick Suchon with the triple digit points. 49 average minutes per match, 4 tries, 397 meters gained, 90 tackles, started 6 of the 11 matches that he appeared in. So again, this is where we get to the more normal numbers here, and this is where that drop off occurs. There's only 2 or 3 guys here at the top of the list that are really impactful from the front row position, and having that is such a big advantage. But after that, there's just not many other players that you're really going to have that much fantasy value with. So once those top guys are gone, and this might be a little bit of a hint for the 2024 year, once Sam Malolo is gone off the board, once players like Dylan Foster are off the board, I think the urgency to draft a front rower doesn't necessarily need to be there, because that big drop off is just, it's now going to be all the same here. And you can see that here in this top 5 at the tail end here with Nelson Reeve at that 5 spot.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, if you keep going down the list, it just, you keep seeing these kind of shelves that they keep dropping down. And to your point, Ryan, I think this is a nice telling sign for when you start preparing for next year's draft, is that, if you can't get the top 2, you might be able to give up a little bit more and want to go somewhere else and look at another position before coming back to the front row.
Yeah, and this is and Vandy, you know about this strategy all the time when it comes to fantasy sports in terms of punting a position.
Yeah.
Right. If you
fade it, whatever.
Yeah. If you don't have a Sam Malolo, or if you don't have a Dylan Foster, or even throw Peter Malcolm, or if you find a guy that the pedigree of your prototypical front rower, which what we saw in Nick Suchon this season, hey, maybe you fade the front row position and you try to get some other guys with value there, because you're just not losing out on that much after those top guys are gone.
I will say, though, one caveat is that, unexpected kind of missed appearances from Dean Muir. And that's a guy who I think if he played the whole season or majority of the season, he's another guy that would be in that tier 1 level. And honestly, potentially a guy that you kind of take a shot on still, even though he maybe wasn't part of it for 2023. The
thing about the
season.
front row is there was just nice surprises. Like I remember, what's his name? Henry Bell for Utah came in. He played like a couple games, like he sprinkled in a couple at the beginning.
Talk about him.
And then it was, late weeks, 13, 14, 15, 16. When he was on the field, 80 minutes a game. He was electric. He was a guy you wanted to play. And he's just basically where he is because he didn't play that much.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about this in the top 5 because
so front row is in a position. It's like it's a lost cause. Don't worry about it. Why play anybody? You look for these kind of diamonds in the rough. It's not a position where you're looking for a guy that's going to play, 15 games of the year. They probably won't. So it's a nice thing to have another guy on the bench, have 2 front row guys, that you can put in sparingly, matchup dependent. And I just remember him off the top. He was awesome for Utah down the stretch.
Well, it's funny. Before we move on here to Brendan, Matthew, I like what you did there in terms of kind of saving grace there and trying to prepare for what our predictions are going to look like in terms of mentioning Dean Muir there. But before we shift on to that, a whole bunch of strategies there. Again, looking for those diamonds in the rough. And I think a big point here as well is maybe there's something about picking some of these paired guys here. Maybe you look at drafting both Mil Santariri and Andrew Quattrin. Therefore, you can play the match. If you see Quattrin starting one match, you can slot him in. If Mil Santariri starts the next one, you slot him in. And having that handcuff there might be very valuable. And I think to even put a bigger kind of emphasis on just kind of how crazy this position is. It's almost completely opposite, which we'll obviously get to later in this offseason, but almost completely opposite of the back 3 position, right? Back 3 position, you got everyone scoring points.
That's
so
right.
You know what I mean? You got top 2 guys that really make a difference and score just that much more points than everybody else. You look at Joe Mano, you look at Nate Oxberger, but then after that, it's kind of everyone scores points there. Here, it's like not that high of a point total. They score a decent amount of points, but then when you get down the list, there's just no points to be had here in the front row position, which is interesting. But all right, Matthew kind of alluded to it there, and he's kind of saving grace here, so we'll allow him to kind of explain himself. I got to explain myself here. We're gonna throw up.
Mine got lost in the wash.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever.
We're gonna throw up my predictions and Matt's predictions here, and I just want to go over for the podcast listener one more time, just our top 5 here, just to remind them before we get into this prediction. Samuel Malola at 1 with 122.7 fantasy points. Dylan Fawcett at number 2 with 119.9 fantasy points. Peter Malcolm at number 3 with 110.3 fantasy points. Nick Suchon 101.7 fantasy points at that number 4 spot, and then Mil Sanarivi to round it out at number 5 with 88.7 fantasy points. And then when you compare that to myself and Matt's prediction, looking a little bit rough. Obviously, we
got a Malcolm, the wrong one.
Different things we're going to have exactly, and we're going to get into that. But Matt, an interesting kind of exercise here to start off the season. Obviously, a lot of unknown going into this one. And Matt, or Vandy, I will let you be kind of the judge here, and you're going to be the kind of the referee moving forward. I only
messed up on 2 of them.
These segments here, in terms of being the moderator in this one. But again, both heading into the season, Dean Muir, at least in 2022, was such a force for that Houston SaberCats side. It was so difficult to go against him. Who knew that he was going to deal with the family issues that he did that put him out for an extended period of time, made him with that absence, finishing as the front row 30 overall. Can't really blame us for this one, at least I think.
I only messed up on 2 of them. That's my verdict. I only messed up on 2 of these top 5 picks. That's all.
All right. So Dean Muir out of the way. We had him at the number 1 spot. Obviously, Samuel Malolo in that spot in actuality here in the 2020 season. Hey, but look, we got one right. Dylan Fawcett at that number 2 spot. We knew that he was going to be solid this season. He was solid in 2022 when we were making these predictions. Again, he was solid in 2023. Finishes at the 2 spot. We predicted the 2 spot. Good for us. We're really, really good at this prediction stuff. But then this is where it kind of shakes up a little bit here. Number 3. I will talk about my prediction here, and then Matt, I'll let you get into yours, which is going to kind of allude into my 4 spot here. But number 3, I had Hugh Roach. Obviously, a huge expectation for what the Chicago Hounds team was going to do. Ended up being not so great. Couldn't convert in the in goal areas when they were close to the try zone. Just really couldn't score points. And Hugh Roach just wasn't able to cut it. Ended up finishing as the front row 36. Obviously, we had Peter Malcolm in that number 3 spot. In actuality, Hugh Roach, I blame it on the Chicago Hounds just not being as good as what we expected to be. And there's gonna be a whole lot of those players that are gonna be on our top 5s this offseason, because we expected a lot more of the Chicago Hounds team, and Hugh Roach is one of those guys that are there. Number 3 for you predicted James Malcolm, Matt, who finishes at the front row 17. But I think you had to hedge your bet here in terms of where it was going to go, and if it made it kind of interesting.
I still take this one as an L. This was probably a bad pick. Hugh Roach and James Malcolm, the 2 bad picks of my top 5. James Malcolm for me. I mean, I thought he was going to be the one to be the best of the Malcolms in Seattle. Peter Malcolm ended up edging him out, and yeah, exactly. And I think that I don't know if it talks about the fact that James Malcolm didn't play as well this year. I think it just talks to the fact that the quality that Peter Malcolm and James Malcolm both are, and that it was just impossible for either of them to really be, or at least impossible for James Malcolm to be in that top 5, just because of the fact that there was always going to be a question on who's going to start which week, and neither of them are going to start every game.
Yeah, it ended up being down who was going to play more and who have more opportunity. As much as it was almost split down the middle, it was just Peter Malcolm had that slight edge. And again, I had him at James Malcolm at that 4 spot. Same reasoning for you there, Matt, in terms of just unfortunate there. I think it was really just a flip of the coin there in deciding and trying to figure out who was going to be that benefactor. It was going to be a Seattle Seawolves hooker in this top 5. It was just trying to decide which one it was going to be. Went the opposite way there for my number 4 spot and for your number 3 spot. Matt, you had number 4 spot. You had Hugh Roach, who I had at number 3. Same reasoning there. Just Chicago Hounds just not being as good as we thought they would be.
And I mean, also, Hugh Roach, I think, was out with injury for some of the season as well. Lindsey Stevens kind of stepped into that role and ended up kind of being the guy who started the rest of the year. And I think it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. It's a combination of all those things.
Yeah. And then number 5.
I'm just going to say those are my two mess ups. The other 3 I can justify.
Yeah. Henry Bell, love the pick.
Okay, well, number 5, yeah, let's talk about Matt. Well, I'll let you go first here since we've talked
I can
about him
justify
already.
it.
Yep.
Henry Bell at that number 5 spot. We alluded to it.
The big
On
man.
pace at the tail end of the season to be in that top 5, just didn't have those numbers early on to keep up with Samuel Malolo and Dylan Fawcett.
He had the numbers. He just didn't play. I mean, he got hurt or whatever. He wasn't in the lineup. I mean, third round, he gets 9.2 points. Fifth round, 10.7 points. And then he has his gap of not playing. He plays, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 games. And he gets almost 70 fantasy points.
Yeah. Oh,
he plays a full
beast
season.
when he played, man.
He's up there at number 1. Easy.
Yeah.
I mean, he plays a full season. He's a top 5. That's why I'm justifying my Henry Bell pick. He was a beast. He played 80 minutes. 6 out of the 8 games that he played.
If you take, I bet you
take
you put his window against anybody else's, even
even Malolo, even Fawcett, all of them. I think he had a better 8-game stretch.
That first stretch of Malolo at the beginning was nasty too.
Yeah, but I mean,
Henry Bell was on one.
Henry Bell was a justified. If he played the full season, he would have been in the top 5 easy. He was doing ridiculous things on the field. The tackle numbers, the tackle numbers that he was putting up, double-digit tackles every week. Every week, no questions asked. It was just ridiculous. And that's my justification. I think I got that pick right.
I'm biased,
I don't regret that
pick
at all.
I'm super biased, but I love it.
All right, I'll take it. Well, my number 5 pick, not looking as great. Andrew Quattrin finishes as the front row 11. But hey, friend of the show, so I think I get points there for being able to again. And
I'll throw it to you.
I mean, Q ended up as the front row 11. Matt, your Henry Bell pick ended up as the front row 13 there. Quattrin, again, kind of same with that Mills Santareve type thing. I think it really could have gone either way in terms of these two guys. It was just who was going to get, at the end of the day, a smaller piece or a bigger piece of that small pie. And it ended up being Mills Santareve. That just edged him out a little bit in terms of being able to get some of those points and take advantage of that. There were times where Quattrin felt like he was a top 5 front rower, but just not enough opportunity to get him in that spot.
His last couple weeks was pretty good.
Oh yeah. I think it was the kind of same situation with James Malcolm and Pierre Malcolm.
Sure.
Like 2 quality guys.
Yep.
2 studs in this league that would be starting anywhere else.
Yep.
If you put them on a team. But it just happens that they're both on the same squad, and you can't have two hookers starting. So somebody has to benefit a bit more than the other.
Yep.
All right. Well, you see the predictions on the list or on your screen there. If you're listening on the podcast, again, a little bit far off there to start off the 2023 year. But again, this is something. No, this is something we are going to track all off-season rankings list long. It started with the front runners, and we're going to do it for every single position. And we're going to keep track here. We're going to have a little competition, Matt. Vandy, like I said, you're going to be the moderator between us here in terms of who can come out at the end with the better, I guess, predictions, better of the worst predictions, I guess, for this 2023 year. But at least in this first one, it's tied. I mean, we both had Dylan Fawcett in our top 5. None of the other ones were there. Pretty good track record there. One for 5 there, Maddie. We're doing a really good job to start the season. But again, for at least in terms of scoring, you and I even there, and no one is able to take the lead in terms of
0, 0, and 1.
0, 0, and 1 heading into next week's rankings, which is going to be the second rowers, which is another very interesting position because again, a position that doesn't have that many points.
You had one.
Hey, don't spoil too much, Ryan. Ryan, don't spoil too much.
Won't spoil too much, but it's going to be interesting to break it down because I think it's very similar to the front row style where there are some select guys there that really had an advantage. But we'll see.
You had one dog.
Who is in that top 5 list? We're going to reveal that all next week when it comes to the second rowers. And again, the top 5 rankings and predictions, a look back and reflection is going to happen all off season long. We're going to continue through the whole player list here. Got through the front rowers. We got the second rowers next week and a whole bunch more positions coming your way for the rest of the year. Nice little exercise here, guys. It is it humbles you. It humbles you to look at these predictions and see how difficult it can be sometimes.
But I don't know. Again, I was 3 for 5, so I don't know.
Right there. Yeah, exactly. But again, also looking at the actual top 5 rankings, I think it reveals a lot with how people should be approaching the season and approaching the draft and approaching how you look at front rowers heading into the 2024 year and just fantasy MLR as a whole moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. But also, a lot of anomalies, and you never know.
That's
can go
fantasy
any
sports,
direction.
man.
Like Vandy said,
That's the
that's
best
fantasy,
part.
baby.
That's fantasy, baby.
That is true.
That's why you play. Because then when you got your hunch and you nail it, that's the best. It's the best.
As
Vandy.
Forrest Gump says, fantasy rugby is like a box of chocolates.
No,
you
he didn't
never
say
know what you're gonna get.
He never
Right?
said that.
I'm pretty sure that's what he said.
On the
All
All
right.
bet, you slurred his words. I heard it.
All right. Well,
didn't
next
say
week
that.
we come back with second rowers. Of course, we'll recap all the latest news and notes. A whole bunch going on, and again, we'll have the results from the 2023 Collegiate Draft, which we'll break down and talk about because I think we're gonna learn a lot from that. For Matt Yee, for Devin Vanderpool, I'm Ryan Yee. We'll be back next week here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Go draft.
Life is like a box of chocolates.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.